Welcome. I'm Rusty, a private investigator. Join me on Truth in Shadows as we embark on a journey to uncover the truth together. Let's dive into the mysterious and expose the hidden realities. The dark truth behind Katelyn Markham's murder. The shocking story you haven't heard. The last time anyone saw her. August 14th, 2011, Fairfield, Ohio. Katelyn Markham was 22 years old, full of life and excitement, with the promise of a bright future ahead of her. It was a typical summer day in Fairfield, a small town where life was calm, and the biggest worries were the usual. What to have for dinner, where to go for the weekend. Katelyn had spent the morning talking to her mother about her upcoming birthday plans. Her fiancé, John Carter, was waiting for her at home to go over the details of the party. It was a simple afternoon, but little did they know, it would be the last time anyone would see Katelyn alive. "I'll call you later, Mom," Katelyn said, smiling as she waved goodbye. Her mother, busy with chores around the house, didn't think anything of it. Katelyn stepped out of the house and into her car, heading to John's house. They had made plans to meet and discuss the birthday celebration. It was just another ordinary day. But Katelyn never made it. Her car was found parked outside the house, but she was nowhere to be found. No phone calls, no texts, no signs of a struggle. Katelyn had vanished. The search begins. When the hours passed without word from Katelyn, her mother's worry turned to panic. By the time the evening rolled in, she called the police. A missing persons report was filed. Fairfield, Ohio, was a small, tight-knit community where the idea of someone going missing was unthinkable. But that's exactly what had happened, and no one knew why. The search began immediately. The police worked quickly, canvassing the town, asking questions, following every lead. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers helped distribute flyers. The town, once full of peace, now seemed fraught with unease. As the days passed, the police began questioning those closest to Katelyn. The focus soon turned to John Carter, her fiancé. He was the last person to have seen Katelyn. John, understandably, was upset, but his reactions seemed odd to some. While many believed he was simply devastated, others found his behavior difficult to read. John told the police that he had met Katelyn earlier in the day, and that she had left to run some errands. But there was something in his voice, something off about the way he described the day, that made the police start to question his version of events. The first suspects. As the investigation continued, the police began to dig into Katelyn's relationships. They interviewed her friends, her family, and her co-workers. The more they learned, the more complicated things became. Katelyn and John had been engaged, but their relationship was far from perfect. The police discovered that Katelyn had been conflicted about her future with John. According to her friends, she had talked about feeling trapped in the relationship. There were times when she mentioned feeling suffocated by John's controlling behavior. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Katelyn had expressed doubts about marrying him. She had confided in a close friend that she was thinking of breaking up with him, but wasn't sure how to do it. But John, on the other hand, denied any issues in their relationship. He told the police that everything had been fine between them. According to him, they had been planning a future together. However, the inconsistencies in his statements raised suspicions. Did he know more than he was letting on? John's behavior was the subject of intense scrutiny. While he showed outward signs of being distraught, his actions were also erratic. He repeatedly asked the police about updates on the investigation, but also grew defensive when asked specific questions about his whereabouts the night Katelyn went missing. Another person under suspicion was Terry, Katelyn's ex-boyfriend. They had ended their relationship months prior, but Terry had remained in contact with Katelyn. He was questioned by the police, but he too claimed to have had no involvement in her disappearance. There was no evidence linking him to the crime, but it was clear that Katelyn's past relationships were beginning to complicate the investigation. The silent days. As days turned into weeks, the search for Katelyn grew more desperate. The police expanded their efforts, checking every lead, following up on every tip, but the trail remained cold. Katelyn had vanished, leaving behind only questions and frustration. Her family was devastated, but as time passed, they too began to suspect that the police weren't looking in the right places. They couldn't believe that someone as innocent and vibrant as Katelyn could simply disappear without a trace. But no one had any answers. The tension in Fairfield grew. The people who once trusted each other now looked at one another with suspicion. There were whispers. Could John have been involved? Could Terry have been hiding something? The longer the investigation went on, the more the townspeople began to turn on each other. The police continued to question John, trying to understand his relationship with Katelyn, but every answer he gave seemed to raise more questions. They began to wonder, could John have been involved in her disappearance? Or was he just a man caught in a tragic situation, unsure of what had happened to the woman he loved? The case continued to drag on, with no solid leads, no new evidence, and no closure for Katelyn's family. Fairfield was no longer a place of peace. The town was haunted by the mystery of Katelyn Markham's disappearance, and everyone was left to wonder, who could have done this? And why? The search for truth. The investigation begins. April 2013, Cedar Grove, Indiana. Nearly 2 years after Katelyn Markham's disappearance, the discovery of her body sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Fairfield. A sense of dread hung in the air as investigators combed through the dense woods of Cedar Grove, 30 miles from Fairfield, where Katelyn's remains had been found. The police had worked tirelessly since her disappearance, but now the case had become even more chilling, with new questions arising as the answers remained stubbornly elusive. Detective Jenna Hayes stood over the site where Katelyn's body had been discovered, her face hard with determination. The remains had been severely decomposed, making it difficult to determine the cause of death. But one thing was certain. Katelyn hadn't just vanished. Someone had taken her life. Who did this? Hayes murmured, the weight of the question pressing on her chest. Who took her and why? The search for Katelyn had been intense, but every lead had ended in a dead end. There had been no sign of forced entry into her home, no witnesses who could point to a suspect. The town of Fairfield, which had once seemed so safe, now felt haunted. The questions of where is Katelyn and who did this echoed through every conversation. Katelyn's disappearance was no longer just a mystery. It was a case of murder, and the more the police dug, the more they realized how many secrets had been buried beneath the surface. Fairfield, once a place of simplicity, was now a town riddled with lies and hidden truths. The breakthrough. It wasn't until April 2013, after the discovery of Katelyn's body, that the case would take a new direction. Just when it seemed like the trail had gone cold, a new witness stepped forward. Someone who had been silently watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to speak. Rachel, a former co-worker of Katelyn's, came forward with a piece of information that no one had expected. She had worked with Katelyn the summer before her disappearance at a local bar. While Rachel hadn't been close to Katelyn, she had noticed something strange the night Katelyn went missing. I didn't think it was important at first, Rachel said, sitting across from Detective Hayes, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But after hearing about her body being found, I knew I had to come forward. According to Rachel, she had seen Katelyn and John together the evening before Katelyn vanished. They were arguing outside the bar. Katelyn had looked upset, her face red from the heated exchange, and John seemed to be doing most of the talking. Rachel couldn't hear the words, but the intensity of the argument was unmistakable. John looked strange, like he was trying to calm her down, but it felt off. He wasn't really listening to her, Rachel recalled. And then, he just left. He drove away without even checking if she was okay. This revelation raised a lot of red flags. Why had Katelyn been upset? And why had John left her behind after what seemed like a serious argument? Rachel's statement didn't offer a clear explanation, but it provided the first real clue that something dark had unfolded between Katelyn and John. Detective Hayes felt a flicker of hope. This was the first time someone had seen John's behavior that evening, and it painted a picture of a relationship far more complicated than anyone had realized. But Rachel's statement raised new questions. What had happened after John left? Had he gone back to find her? Or was he somehow involved in her disappearance? Uncovering the past. As Detective Hayes and her team delved deeper into Katelyn's past, they began to uncover unsettling truths about her relationship with John Carter. While everyone had assumed they were the perfect couple, the reality was far more complicated. Katelyn had confided in several friends about her unhappiness with John. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had told them that she felt trapped. She had doubts about the engagement, and while she hadn't made any final decisions, she was leaning towards breaking up with him. But Katelyn had also been conflicted. She didn't want to hurt John, and she wasn't sure how to handle the situation. It wasn't that she didn't love him. It was that their relationship had grown unhealthy, filled with arguments and tension. John was controlling, and Katelyn felt like she had lost her independence. She often talked about how isolated she felt, especially in the months before her disappearance. Detective Hayes continued to piece together Katelyn's life. Conversations with Katelyn's close friends revealed that she had been struggling emotionally. She had spoken about feeling suffocated by John and the pressure of the upcoming wedding. The more the investigation unfolded, the more it became clear Katelyn had been trying to make a difficult decision. But had John known about her doubts? Had he become angry or fearful of losing her? Did that lead to something far darker? John's behavior during the investigation was now under even more scrutiny. He had been the last person to see Katelyn, and the inconsistencies in his statements made him an increasingly likely suspect. Could he have killed Katelyn in a moment of rage? Or was there something else at play? The web tightens. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to gain more momentum. John Carter remained the central figure of suspicion, and his life became an open book. The police learned about his background, his temper, and his past behavior. They also found something chilling. John had a history of controlling behavior in his past relationships. Could that have been the trigger that led to Katelyn's death? In the meantime, Katelyn's family struggled with their grief and confusion. Her mother, devastated by her daughter's disappearance, couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. Katelyn was not the type of person to simply vanish. She was close with her family, and her relationship with John was supposed to be a happy chapter in her life. But what had happened behind closed doors? And then there was Terry, Katelyn's ex-boyfriend, who remained an enigma. While he was not directly connected to Katelyn's disappearance, the police couldn't ignore the fact that he had been a significant part of her life. Did he hold any vital information? Or had he been unknowingly involved in something larger than he realized? A web of lies. The investigation was at a crossroads. With each passing day, the case grew more complicated. New evidence pointed toward John, but the truth was still just out of reach. Why had Katelyn disappeared? What led to her death? Detective Hayes knew they were getting closer. But with every new piece of information, the web of lies and deception surrounding the case seemed to grow tighter. The answers were there, but could they uncover them before it was too late? The trial and the battle of wits. The trial begins. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. The trial of John Carter had officially begun. It had been months since Katelyn Markham's body was discovered, and now, the questions that had lingered for so long were about to be answered. Or at least, that was what everyone hoped. John sat in the defendant's chair, his face a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed him. He looked weary, as if the weight of the world had been pressing down on him for months. But beneath the surface, there was something else, something more unsettling. His legal team had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but no amount of preparation could hide the fact that they were facing one of the most challenging trials in recent memory. Across from him sat the prosecution team, led by District Attorney Sarah Miller. She was sharp, focused, and determined. She had spent years preparing for this case, and she knew the stakes. This was more than just a murder trial. It was about justice for Katelyn Markham. "Your Honor," the judge said, his voice stern, "we will now proceed with opening statements." "Prosecution, you may begin." Sarah Miller stood, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the jury box. Her eyes scanned the room before she began speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not just a case of a missing woman. This is the case of a young woman who had everything ahead of her, a promising future, a loving family, and a fiancé she was planning to marry. But on the evening of August 14th, 2011, Katelyn Markham vanished, and after nearly 2 years of searching, we discovered her body. What we learned from that discovery is that Katelyn did not run away. She did not leave on her own accord. No, she was murdered." Sarah paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "We are here today to prove that the man who stood closest to Katelyn, the man who should have protected her, is the one responsible for her death. John Carter, the man who claimed to love her, but in reality, he was controlling, manipulative, and abusive. He had everything to lose when Katelyn wanted to leave him. And on that fateful night, when she tried to escape him, he took her life." The room was silent as Sarah's words settled. She turned toward the jury, making eye contact with each of them before sitting back down. The first witnesses. The trial proceeded swiftly, with the prosecution calling their first witnesses. The courtroom filled with tension as the defense team shifted in their seats, their faces masked in concentration. The first witness was Rachel, the former co-worker of Katelyn, who had seen her and John arguing outside the bar the night Katelyn disappeared. Rachel took the stand, her hands trembling as she spoke. I was working at the bar that night, Rachel began, her voice shaking. I saw Katelyn and John outside. They were arguing. Katelyn looked upset, and John seemed like he wasn't listening to her. He was, distant, almost cold. I didn't hear everything, but I saw them for a few minutes before he just drove away. The prosecutor nodded, her gaze fixed on John, watching his reaction. John didn't flinch. His expression remained unchanged, but inside, his thoughts were a blur. "Did you see anyone else that night?" Sarah Miller asked. Rachel hesitated. I saw someone in the distance. A shadow, maybe. It was hard to make out, but something felt off. I thought maybe it was just my imagination." The defense attorney, Mark Reynolds, immediately objected. "Objection, Your Honor. This is pure speculation. The witness cannot be sure who she saw." The judge nodded, agreeing with the objection. "Sustained. Please stick to what you know, Mississippi." Rachel nodded nervously, and Sarah Miller moved on. "Did you notice anything unusual about John's behavior?" she asked. Rachel glanced at John before answering, her voice barely a whisper. He seemed almost relieved when Katelyn left. It's like he didn't care, like he wanted her to leave. The prosecution's case was gaining momentum, but it was far from over. The defense had yet to speak, and everyone knew that John's lawyers would fight hard to clear his name. The battle of wits. As the days passed, the trial intensified. Mark Reynolds, the defense attorney, was known for his ability to discredit witnesses and create doubt. He had a reputation for being a bulldog in the courtroom, and now he was taking his turn. When Reynolds finally stood to address the jury, he wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a lot about Katelyn Markham's disappearance. But let's take a step back. The prosecution wants you to believe that John Carter is guilty. But what we know is this: John loved Katelyn. He wanted to marry her. He was devastated when she went missing." Reynolds paused, allowing his words to hang in the air. He glanced at John, who sat with a stoic expression, as if he were the victim of a great injustice. "But what if John didn't kill Katelyn?" Reynolds continued. "What if she simply ran away? What if she wanted to start a new life without him? That's a possibility, isn't it? Katelyn had her own troubles, her own fears, her own doubts. She wasn't perfect. She was conflicted, unsure of where she stood. And the fact that she left without a word to anyone, raises questions." Reynolds turned to the jury, locking eyes with each one of them. "What we don't know is how or why Katelyn ended up in those woods. What we do know is that John Carter is not the man who took her life." The defense had thrown a wrench into the case, but the prosecution wasn't backing down. The final moments. As the trial neared its end, both sides were preparing their closing arguments. The room was charged with anticipation. The jurors exchanged glances, knowing that their decision would change everything. The prosecution's final words were clear and direct. "We have proven that Katelyn Markham was murdered by the man she trusted the most. We have shown you the evidence, the witnesses, and the lies that were told. And now, we ask you to deliver justice for Katelyn." The defense's closing argument was simple but powerful. Yes, John loved Katelyn, but love alone doesn't make someone guilty. There is no clear evidence to prove that he killed her. All we have are assumptions, speculation, and hearsay. John is innocent, and you cannot convict him based on the weak case the prosecution has presented. The jury filed out to deliberate. The room fell silent as everyone waited for their decision. The tension was palpable. The world seemed to hold its breath. The trial that could change everything. The jury had begun deliberating, and the fate of John Carter hung in the balance. The evidence, the witnesses, and the conflicting testimonies had led to this point. But what would the verdict be? The mind of the killer. The strain of silence. The courtroom had emptied, the final gavel had fallen, and the jury had deliberated. Now John Carter sat alone in a small room, a glass of water in his hand, his mind reeling. The trial had been a blur, the faces of the jury, the accusing words of the prosecution, the passionate defense, it had all blurred together. But one thing remained clear, the weight of his own mind. John had always been in control. From the moment he met Katelyn, he had been the one in charge. Their relationship had been everything to him. Katelyn was his world. But somewhere along the way, he had lost grip. Now, as he sat in the silence of the room, he could feel the strain of it all, the guilt, the fear, the dread of what was coming next. Guilt. It was the feeling that gnawed at him every waking hour. It had been there since that night, that moment when he crossed a line, when Katelyn had said those words he could never forget. "I'm not sure about us anymore." That was the tipping point, the moment everything started to unravel. He had loved her, yes, but something darker had taken root inside him, something that had made him fear losing her more than anything else. She was going to leave me, he whispered to himself, as if trying to convince himself of the truth. She was going to leave me. The thought of her breaking away, the idea of her finding someone else, had sent him into a spiral. The control he had maintained over their relationship had suddenly slipped, and he couldn't stand it. It was in that moment of weakness and fear that everything had changed. She was mine, John thought bitterly, staring at the water in front of him. She couldn't just leave me. The moment of rage. John's mind continued to replay the events of that night, the argument, the confrontation. The way Katelyn had stood before him, her eyes filled with fear and anger. She had never spoken to him that way before. She had never questioned him like that. She had never been so determined to break free. The night had started like any other, but everything shifted the moment Katelyn spoke the words he dreaded. She said she needed space, that she didn't know if she wanted to continue their relationship. It was then that he had felt the walls closing in on him. She was slipping away, and he couldn't let it happen. He had to do something. I loved her too much, John muttered, standing up and pacing the small room. I loved her too much to let her go. The pressure built inside him. His anger surged, and before he knew it, he had snapped. He didn't mean to hurt her. He didn't plan for things to go this far. But in that moment, when she had turned to leave, he had grabbed her. He had tried to stop her. And it was then, in that moment of desperation, when everything felt like it was slipping away, that he lost control. He couldn't remember the exact details. He had yelled at her, pleaded with her to stay. But the more she fought back, the more desperate he became. She had always been strong, always stood up to him. But that night, he could feel the weakness in her resolve. He could sense that she was finally breaking free from the grip he had on her. That's when it happened. In that flash of rage, he had done something he could never undo. He had pushed her. He had hit her. And before he knew it, she had fallen. The memory flooded back to him, Katelyn's body limp, her eyes wide, but no longer filled with anger. They were filled with fear. The same fear that had consumed him when she said she was leaving. The aftermath. The silence in the room felt suffocating. John's hands shook as he clutched the water glass, his mind reeling from the flood of memories. He couldn't bring himself to face the truth. Not yet. The more he thought about that night, the more his thoughts became clouded with doubt. What had he done? Was it really his fault? The night after the incident, he had driven to Cedar Grove, far away from Fairfield. He hadn't planned to bury Katelyn's body, but he didn't know what else to do. The guilt had driven him to hide the evidence, to pretend like everything could go back to normal. He wasn't ready to face the world, to face the people who knew him, the people who trusted him. Could I have stopped? John whispered aloud, the question echoing in his head. Could I have let her go? But that thought only made him feel worse. He had lost control, he knew that now. But at the time, he had convinced himself that he could fix things. He could make it right. But he hadn't. He had buried her, buried everything, and now, 2 years later, the truth was finally coming to light. And he wasn't sure if he could handle it. The weight of the truth. John had never imagined that his life would come to this. He had always been the one in charge, the one who had control. But now, as the trial had progressed, he was beginning to understand the enormity of his actions. He wasn't just facing a murder charge, he was facing the crushing weight of his own conscience. He had lied to everyone, to Katelyn's family, to his own. He had buried the truth for so long, convinced himself that he could keep the past buried. But now, with the trial in full swing, the past was catching up to him. The pressure of the trial was overwhelming. He had always thought he could survive anything, but now, as the courtroom buzzed with discussions of the case, the weight of what he had done was suffocating. The thought of spending the rest of his life in prison was paralyzing, but it was the truth that had always been buried deep inside him, that was now consuming him. John looked in the mirror, seeing his own reflection for the first time since the trial began. He had always thought of himself as a man of control, but now he saw the truth. He had been a man of lies. And it was too late to turn back. A mind unraveled. As the trial continued and the weight of the truth pressed down on him, John's resolve began to crack. The mind of the killer was a fragile thing, and John was beginning to realize just how fragile his own mind had become. The truth had come out, and there was no escape from it now. In the final moments of his trial, John Carter faces the consequences of his actions. But even in the face of justice, will he find redemption? Or is the truth too much for him to bear? The killer's confession. The weight of the truth. John sat in the small, stark prison cell, his hands clenched tightly around the pen. The pages of his notebook were scattered across the small metal desk before him, and each one contained his thoughts, his confessions, his attempts to make sense of what he had done. His mind was still racing, but now, after the verdict had been read, he finally had the space to think, to reflect, to understand the depth of his actions. He had spent weeks in silence after the trial. He had heard the whispers, felt the eyes of the other inmates on him, knew that he would never be able to escape the consequences of what he had done. The trial had ended, but the pain of losing Katelyn, of knowing that he had taken her life, still tore at him. The years of control, the lies, the deceit, it had all built up to this point. Why did I do it? He asked himself aloud, his voice barely a whisper in the cold, empty room. What made me lose control? John had told his lawyers, his family, and even the jury what they needed to hear. The narrative that made him seem like an innocent man caught in a tragic situation. He had convinced himself that he had acted out of love, out of fear, but deep down, he knew that was a lie. The truth was uglier. It was a truth he could no longer deny, justifying the unforgivable. The pages of John's notebook were filled with rambling thoughts, each one trying to make sense of the night Katelyn had died. Each word was like a small cut, an attempt to atone for the guilt that gnawed at him. He had to write it down. He had to try to explain to himself why it had happened. He remembered that night vividly. Katelyn had been standing in front of him, her arms crossed, her face a mix of sadness and anger. Her words had pierced him. She was leaving. She didn't know if she wanted to stay with him anymore. The idea of losing her had been too much for him to bear. He couldn't accept it. He had never been the one to lose control. He had always dominated. But now, for the first time, he could feel her slipping away, and it terrified him. I couldn't let her go, John wrote, the words coming out in a rushed, frantic scrawl. I loved her more than anyone else. She was everything to me. She had to stay. She couldn't just leave me. I couldn't lose her. The words seemed to echo back at him, mocking him, and for the first time, John felt the weight of his actions pressed down on him. He had never understood what it meant to truly love someone. It wasn't about ownership or control. It wasn't about forcing someone to stay with you out of fear. But in his desperation, he had lost sight of that. I didn't mean to hurt her, John continued to write. I swear, I didn't mean to kill her. But she left me no choice. She pushed me to it. She wouldn't listen. I had to make her stay. I had to force her to see reason. I was desperate. As John wrote these words, he could feel the familiar tinge of anger building inside him. The frustration of trying to explain his actions, the need to make sense of it all, was consuming him. But even as he wrote, he knew deep down that it didn't matter. The truth was that he had lost control, and in doing so, he had ended her life. There was no justification for it, no excuse that would ever make it right. The long road to understanding. John's confession didn't stop there. It became an almost obsessive task, something he couldn't stop himself from doing. The pages grew thicker as he poured out his thoughts, each page heavier than the last. He wrote about his feelings of possession, his belief that Katelyn had been his to keep, that she belonged to him. But there was a shift in his writing. The more he wrote, the more he began to acknowledge the reality of what he had done. He could no longer hide behind the excuses, the justifications. He could no longer pretend that this was just a tragic accident. He had killed her. He had murdered the woman he had claimed to love. John stared at the words on the page, feeling the weight of them. For the first time, he allowed himself to confront the truth. He had taken Katelyn's life. Not because of love, not because of fear, but because of control. He had wanted to hold on to her so tightly that he had broken everything in the process. I couldn't live with the fact that she didn't want me anymore, he wrote, his handwriting shaky. I couldn't stand the thought of being alone. And now I have to live with the consequences of what I did. The final confrontation. The guards had warned him that he would need to stand trial again for his actions, that the truth of what happened that night had yet to be fully revealed. But John was already facing his own internal trial. He knew what he had done. He knew that nothing could undo the damage he had caused. He could sit through as many trials as they wanted, hear as many accusations as they could throw at him, but none of it would matter. The guilt was his punishment. In his final moments, he reflected on everything, on how he had treated Katelyn, how he had controlled her, how he had pushed her away when all she had ever wanted was freedom. The truth was too heavy for him to carry anymore. And so, in this moment of quiet reflection, John understood the enormity of his actions. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he wrote, his hand trembling. I don't deserve it, but maybe by telling the truth, maybe by admitting what I did, I can at least show that I understand. What I did was unforgivable, I can never make it right. He closed the notebook and set it aside, the weight of his words settling in his chest. There would be no redemption. There would be no relief. But maybe, just maybe, telling the truth would give him a small bit of peace. It would be the only thing he could do to try and make amends, even if it was far too late. The price of truth. John Carter had confessed, not just to the world, but to himself. The truth was out, and while justice was served, it was clear that for John, the true cost of his actions would never be paid in the courtroom. The reflection. The case of Katelyn Markham has ended, and justice has been served with John Carter's conviction. But, if I'm being honest, the closure doesn't bring me peace. Even with the trial over and the verdict delivered, there's something about this case that still gnaws at me. I've worked on many cases before, faced many criminals and victims, but this one feels different. It's not just about solving a murder, but about the complexity of human nature that I couldn't ignore. John Carter loved Katelyn, that's the truth. But his love wasn't love at all. It was possession. It was control. He couldn't accept her wanting to leave him, wanting a life outside of him. When she tried to end their relationship, when she tried to break free, John couldn't bear it. When I look at John's actions, I don't just see a murderer. I see a man trapped by his own fears and obsessions. I think a lot about what we call love control, when love is not about freedom, not about sharing, but about manipulation. John didn't realize that his need to control was slowly destroying their relationship. The fear of losing her pushed him to act, and once he crossed the line, there was no going back. I want to make something clear. Never let fear control you. Never let the fear of losing someone make you lose yourself. Love is about freedom, respect, and mutual understanding, not about holding someone captive because of your own insecurities. As I've followed the investigation, I've come to realize something more profound than just catching a criminal. The truth behind John's actions isn't just about punishment. It's about understanding the darker sides of human behavior, how emotions like fear, jealousy, and control can turn people into someone they never imagined they could be. Katelyn's case is just one of millions of stories that go untold, of victims who are forgotten. Each case has its own story, its own reasons behind the actions of those involved. And when the trial is over, the victims are still left in the shadows, their families still suffering the pain of losing them. But we cannot let these stories fade away. And that's why I'm here today. We cannot continue living in a society where truth is hidden and justice isn't served. Katelyn Markham's story, like so many others, serves as a reminder that we cannot just gloss over the uncomfortable truths. Justice is not a one-man job. It's a fight we all must take part in, whether we are in law enforcement, as witnesses, or simply as people who care enough to ask the difficult questions. I don't just want to tell you Katelyn's story. I want you to join me in this journey of uncovering the truth in cases that haven't been solved, stories that haven't been heard. We can make a difference. We can make sure that victims are remembered and justice is done. Don't let these stories be forgotten, I tell myself, thinking of the victims whose voices will never be heard. Don't let the pain of the victims go unnoticed. Let's keep searching for the truth, because every story matters, and every life deserves justice. I'm asking you to join me in this journey. Every story deserves to be heard, and every victim deserves justice. I'm not just an amateur detective, I'm a seeker of the truth, and I want you to join me in that pursuit. Every case needs more eyes, more voices, more hands to help uncover the truth. And if we work together, we can make sure that justice is served. So, I ask you, join me on this journey. Share these stories, help expand the search for truth, and together, we'll create a community that never lets justice slip away. We can change the world, one case at a time, one truth at a time. And to do that, I need you.